I talk to a spirit. She comes in my dreams.
What is the path to awakening supposed to look like, to feel like? How do you know if you are on it? We ask these very sacred and sometimes vulnerable questions to many different women from all walks of life. A conversation that needs to be shared and heard. I'm Jo Hendy.
I'm Amanda Parker.
And welcome to the Girl Awakening podcast.
Hello, Amanda.
Good morning.
Happy Wednesday.
Happy 11/11. I got it in. Yes.
Woohoo! Powerful day, which is so perfect for our beautiful guest today. So today we have an astrologer on, which I don't want to say just astrologer because I don't get that vibe from this beautiful woman, but I'm going to just read a little bit about her bio and then a little bit about herself so our listeners can understand what I'm talking about. So this ancient art of astrology is to be revered, treated delicately with the utmost respect and integrity. Your cosmic map is unique and sacred to you and calls you home. I love that. Tiarnie breathes astrology. It has been her soul's language for lifetimes. Since she was 9 years old, the only language she truly understood. Once astrology is felt and embodied, there is no going back. Studying and experiencing life is studying and experiencing astrology. There is no separation. Tiarnie's joy and passion is to awaken and activate you to remember your magic and to come home to your own medicine and create a solid foundation on which you build your life on. We are the planets. We are stardust. We are the entire universe. We are miracles. I freaking love that.
I just can feel this huge expansion hearing that.
Oh my God. Welcome, Tiarnie.
Oh. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And it was nice to hear that read back. That's lovely.
No, it's really, really beautiful because here at Girl Awakening, we're all about hearing everybody's story, but this coming home feels like a very valid, tangible feeling at the moment.
It is, and I think that everything's being unveiled and unmasked quite deeply at the moment for people, and which is beautiful. Like the offering's always been there. The universe has always had the magic. It's just people remembering it and then living in that. It's just it's actively participating relentlessly and ruthlessly sometimes in life, and not trying to bypass all the stuff, but to be really present with it. And I think that astrology is just an incredible tool for that, but I do really appreciate the sentiment, which is completely true as well, that I am absolutely more than an astrologer. I mean, to have any label is very limiting, and it's not something that I live by at all. I don't do labels on anything because it's just we're multifaceted. We're a diamond, we're diamonds. How could a diamond only have one polished side? Like, there's so much of us, and each single day we get to experience a lifetime, and we get to experience something completely new every day if we choose. And so to just say that I am this means that each day I show up just showing that part of my diamond, and it's like, that's fucking boring, right? Like, I'm multifaceted, I'm multi-dimensional, like I am everything and I am nothing. So to be able to be seen as more than astrologer is great, because sometimes I think people do just go, oh, she's an astrologer. I'm like, oh, I'm actually Tiarnie. Like, and I always remember saying that even early on, like in my 20s, when people go, oh, you're spiritual. I'm like, oh, please never, ever call me spiritual, because that takes away from who I actually am. And at the end of it, I am Tiarnie. Like, that's it. Like, that's all I can be is myself. So, with no labels. So I really appreciate that as you shared that, Jo. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
That was we can all take a very big cut of what you just said on the whole label front, because I think we're boxed in by identity, even identity, like it's such a what do you call it, a resisting factor, or a confining, or
inhibiting,
absolutely,
limitation. And I think also it's like an indication of the shortcuts we're taking in life all the time now, like we're just putting labels on something, we move on to the next thing, like we've got, it doesn't express the fullness of anything at all.
Exactly. Because how can we only be one thing? And you're so right, Amanda, like the moving forward, like, oh, you're this next, like that's this next, like let's move on. Because again, it's this busy hustle culture. If we just give everyone something, but people, humans have this desire to identify with something though, like, but, and I used to say this in my 20s. It's just funny because when people like identify with what they eat, like I don't care if you are a vegan or a vegetarian or you eat a carnivore or you eat macas. Like I actually just don't care what you eat, because if that's the only thing that you're identifying with is the food that you put in your body, like yes, nourish your body. I'm not saying that. Like yes, love the food, but if that's the only thing, like I am this, and then that the rigidity in that, and it's like why can't we be everything, like, and it doesn't define who you are, and it just used to crack me up. I mean, it still does. It's quite funny, but it's just
where we've just talked about is a beautiful like segue into our question, because which is an ever evolving thing, as we know.
Yes.
Is Tiarnie, how did your awakening begin?
And this is just such a huge question. And when you both asked me to come and join this podcast, I mean, this is wild for me, like, because I don't talk about my story very much. And I literally just said this the other day to like friends and clients and things. And it's not because I avoid it. It's just because I don't talk about it. Like I have my own podcast. I want to set people up astrologically. I do my little story times or passion tangents and things like that. But I don't often sort of sit in the like, oh, what actually happened? I forget, because it's just not forget, but it's just been normal for me for so long to be awakened. It wasn't, my story. I always feel like I don't have that very like, oh, I can relate to that. Like I did high school or uni, and then, I was in an unhappy marriage. Then I become free from that. And then I found myself, or, I went to uni and then I didn't want to do that, or I was corporate, then become spiritual. I mean, I do not relate to any of those things because that wasn't my experience. And I know that a spiritual awakening experience, that is the majority. And that's so cool. Like that is like, I understand that. But again, I have my own astrology chart. So to be honest, I see a lot of people's, some big activations happen for them that are happening in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. I was having them at 5. I was having these things at 5, 7, 9, 12. So I was having a lot of these things very early. And I suppose I always just knew, like I knew. I didn't like, oh, I really was into something for a little while, and then for 20 years I wasn't into it, and then I came back to it. Like, no, I think the only thing I've ever been good at is just being myself. And that has taken so much courage, because I'm not the normal, typical person. And growing up, I can reflect back on my father, who's passed away now, who was a true anarchist, rebel, sort of guy. And whilst, he never really fit into society, he gave me permission to also not. And so even though there was like a lot of hardship in my childhood, a lot of trauma, I ran away from home at 15. I was pregnant at 16, which, was great. I was homeless at 17, 18 with a child. I have been through the mud, like I have been through the fires of hell as a teenager, with a child, and I think that, of course, that is something that I chose. It's not something that I felt happened to me, even at that age. And even though there was frustration and trauma and dire stuff going on sometimes, one thing now I reflect back on is, my parents' ability to have gone, well, you are who you are, and I was that quirky, always asking everyone, always the parents, like, what's your sign? What's the cat sign? What's the dog sign? Like just that was just always happening. And I would remember people's signs before I remembered their names. And, I would be very bold and outspoken and very Lilith. And it's something that Lilith can often be very suppressed in women, because they're told to be good or to hush or to quiet down and, to not expose or express. And it does take courage and boldness. So I would say that the awakening for me was my whole life. I did look at my family and the way they lived and was like, this doesn't really feel like how I want to live my life, hence why I ran away. And, and then falling pregnant was just like this huge miracle because I'm 16, and my dad was so amazing and supported me. And, it was incredible, like, to think now I've got a 26-year-old, an 18-year-old and a 14-year-old. And I can tell you, if any of them fell pregnant at any age right now, even in my 26-year-old, I'm like, are you having a baby? Are you sure you want to have a baby? Are you really sure? I think you're too young, So Dad definitely was just, oh my God, he was just such a wild, eccentric man. And I just have so much reverence and respect for him, not just because he's passed, but we had a very close relationship because my mum abandoned me. So, my dad was my everything, and I think for me, and of course I knew I'd get emotional. I am just about to bleed, but, for me too, my dad was my parents. To be abandoned by your mother is a huge wound for a woman. And I'm sure that, and I know a lot of women have issues with the mum. Hello, darlings. We all have mummy and daddy issues. It's in the chart. It's just what happens. We can't avoid this shit. Even my children have mummy and daddy issues. Don't worry about that. So, but the thing is that, there's a difference between edging up against the mum who was there for you for 20 years and having a mum who completely abandoned you, and then I suppose that there's even further the adoption and, there's no one trauma bigger than the other, right? It just is. However, for me, of course, that tainted so much, because then she went on to have other children that she kept. And so, of course, like as a small child, you're like, okay, of course, I'm not good enough. And then you come into these sort of trauma loops. I have a death. My birth mother is a death mother. That's a whole different topic, but she's a death mother. And my stepmother was a death mother. A death mother is truly a mother who wants you to die, who would kill their child. Obviously this is a very deep sort of part of the conversation, but it's just how I lived my life. And so I've broken that because I've got 3 daughters, and I'm not a death mother, which is, considering I've got a moon square Pluto in my chart, but it seems quite prevalent that I've been able to break a lot of DNA and a lot of karmic stuff around my mother's generation. Like, I have no lineage with that anymore. And that's very hard to do. That takes a lot of work. But in saying that, my dad was everything to me. So when he died in 2013, it was like, I'm now an orphan, so I don't see my birth mother, and and it feels like that. So, but what I have reflected on, and as we become crones and hags, like, we reflect on our childhood, and I hope this for everyone, because this isn't the case. Some people want to hold on to trauma and stories, and then they're just in these loops and they're miserable, and it's sort of a bit shit, like, you don't want to live like that. Like, life is amazing, and but being able to reflect back, because of course our parents did the best that they could with the knowledge that they had at the time. Like, not every fully awake and fully conscious when they're raising children, and we all make mistakes as parents. However, now as I'm older, just reflecting back, that was the permission slip that I got. No matter what happened, no matter any of the trauma, I am in such deep reverence for the permission slip to always be who I am. So, that's just the part of the meat of this story, is that for me, it was always, I've always been awake in a way, if that makes sense. It's not, I didn't have a particular moment that awakened me. I'm like, oh, now here I am. It just continued to unfold. And so, that journey just continues. And when I'm in my early 20s, I'm meeting Louise Hay and Wayne Dyer and doing work with Brandon Bays. I mean, these are all my teachers, right? Like, this is my foundation. And so for me, I was always the youngest in the room by age, of course, but in my 20s, my friends were in their 30s, 40s, they were my parents' age, because they were studying astrology and they were spiritual. I was doing all of those things. So I was in that, quote unquote spiritual community in my 20s, hanging out with, doing all these workshops with Brandon Bays, watching What the Bleep Do We Know, because that, like, gave me, like, this is the proof of the way I live, like, if you haven't watched it, go and watch it. This is my life. But it's sort of, yeah, I do. And it's just so interesting because it's all just your chart, at the same time too. It's like, it's not a competition. Everyone's got to awaken differently. And because I see some people like in their 40s having an activation that I had literally at 12, it just makes sense. Like this was my journey here. And I always knew that this was my last life here. Like, I just know that. I'm like, this is my last life. Like, I knew that. And then astrologically, I found a couple of things that sort of, I wouldn't say they say yes to that this is your last life. It's very nuanced. Astrology charts are extremely nuanced, and one thing isn't a one fits all for everyone. But then I discovered that, and I was like, oh my God, like I knew that. And I've had a couple of other people, not that, I've never seen a reader, I've never seen a psychic. Like I would never go outside of myself for what I have within me, whether that's astrology, sitting with a tree, being in a stream, like nature, the biggest awakener that we can have, and it's free, right? Like, I always do myself out of business. I'm like, oh, go and sit with the tree. Don't come and do another course with me. Go and sit with the tree. Like I want people to, know who they are. And I know that, there are so many layers of deconditioning that so many people have done. And I think it's just because I started early that I haven't had society's conditioning. And that's, I think, what makes me, obviously, but also it just makes it a different story. My awakening story. I wasn't at 20 being told I needed to do this or going to university. I mean, I didn't even finish school, for crying out loud. Like, I've never been in the system. I've never worked full time. I've never done anything that, in a way, I don't want to do, because I've really like honored my Lilith as well. And I was a young mum, obviously. So, but again, that very Eve-like essence that society has put onto women versus the Lilith, not the angry Lilith, but the really sovereign Lilith, the really authentic Lilith. It's very different. And you feel that when you meet people, right? Like you feel authentic people. And so I suppose, I don't know if I've answered the question very well or, how I've gone with it, but yeah.
I just want to like, just hold the moment for a second and just,
thank you.
I want to acknowledge you.
Yeah.
Like, seriously. Oh God, makes me. Oh, like
I want to dance around the tree right now.
You're making me cry.
No, I just want to acknowledge you because you are the reason we created this.
Yeah.
Sorry, let me. I want to share this. What I'm feeling. I can really feel the space or the crevice or the deep way. That's the word. The deep way that you are creating for not just women but for everybody. Just to sit in who they really are. Like, fuck, I can so feel that with you, and it's so beautiful. And I just want to acknowledge you for the space that you have created and that you hold. It's so fucking amazing. Like, seriously, you're just speaking and breaking. When you speak, I feel like you're just breaking down, shattering beliefs. And like, this is the reason we have this podcast, because we want anyone that listens. We have men that love this podcast just to be fucking okay with where they're at, who they are,
feeling in here, and and
just not caring.
See you like a lone wolf on the top of a mountain howling at the moon, and then all these other wolves coming up and howling with you, because you're calling people. You're an activator beyond activating. Like, the passion in you is just divine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You too. And what's really like, and this breaks my heart in this way too, because a little girl who's abandoned by her mum, she doesn't want her mum. And so then, I surround myself with women who are older than me, right? That love me, that support me. Usually there's still, stuff with older women sometimes that I think that anyone's intimidated by someone who knows who they are. I think that that's a full stop. It doesn't matter anything else. If you don't really know who you are often intimidated by other people. And that's not a good or bad thing. And I mean, the amount of people who have said that I'm intimidating, I'm like, oh my God, like I cry at a butterfly. Like, what the fuck? Like, I'm actually so super soft. And it's just that, I know who I am. And so I think that when you know who you are, you have this sort of presence. I do have Pluto and Lilith in my first house. of self, which is power and again sovereignty. So there is this energy, and I get my energy, and my energy can be intense, and I get that.
But it's a call to truth, though, isn't it? It's a call to, and you use the word authenticity, and that word is just on fire at the moment in the ripple around the planet, because we are being called in a major way to what you alluded to before. Like, the magic's always been there, but the veils are lifting. The fires are there for us to be in our authenticity and our truth, and having Pluto and Lilith in your first house. It's kind of like, for you, it's what you're sharing about your journey so far, but it's part of your purpose for being here, isn't it? Is fucking own themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And so having these older women, or just women in general, because now I'm not 20 anymore either, but just having crone like women, whether they're my age or whatever, but just sit in that reverence or visibility and respect is huge, because of course, there was that emptiness when a mother abandons her daughter, right? Like when she doesn't want her anymore and she can't love her, or whatever that is. That's all of her story. But then when there is support from other women, like, that's always like my most juiciest thing is these conversations and this richness and heart connection,
Absolutely, and I think that's what I was trying to say. I just got caught big time in my heart. Was the acknowledgement around you, even as a young girl, to have the awareness that it was all happening for you, and that you were aware of that somewhere, and you went with it. You didn't avoid it. You didn't put it to the side, or I'm a little girl, or any of that. You just decided. It's like you made a decision that, no, I'm taking all of this on, and this is all happening for me. And the other thing I wanted to say to around your dad is like what an amazing gateway he allowed you to walk through, to stand in that, with his quirkiness, and it's just so beautiful. And that the role that he played, you didn't need a mother, exactly what you needed to be, that person, that being that you.
And it's so amazing, everything comes back to astrology. But interestingly enough, Pallas Athena was born from her father Zeus's eye, right? And I have Pallas Athena in Gemini, so it's cerebral, it's intelligent, right? It's a very intelligent, cerebral place, considering that she's birthed from her father's eye. My dad has his moon in Gemini, and I was like, that the moon is the nurturing, the mother, and his moon and my Pallas Athene are connected. And I was like, and there is a feeling of having, being a motherless daughter, and that's okay. Like, I don't have any. We know when we've healed because our body tells us, right? And so, we have a lot of people that like to stay stuck in story, but they're like, oh no, I've forgiven and I've done all these things. And we're like, it's clearly you haven't, like your whole life is telling me a different story right now. Like, I don't really believe what people say. I believe how I feel, and I believe the life that they are living. Like, that will tell me who you are before what your words do. But yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. Sorry, I've just had a little bit of a mind blank.
With the eye, I don't know. You're great with all these people, these astrology people. I'm not great with them, but I totally.
We're all talking the same language, because it's like astrology is storytelling, isn't it? Like what is with it so much for everyone to kind of will get the feeling of what you're sharing, because it's within that context of the story.
Yeah.
So powerful, because it comes to life, and there's no mistaking how these blueprints or energies play out. And even though we're full of choices all through our life path, our choices play out in ways that are like, when you look back in hindsight and you go, oh yeah.
It's a bit of a mystery with fate and fortune, and if we really do have free will, because it's all just there, the timing of our life just unfolds in our chart. And it doesn't mean that we do nothing and just, you know, like, so, because of course we can have two people's charts very similar and they're completely different, because again, they still have, they're showing or displaying shadows or yang, or they're unawakened, you know, and you know, those sorts of things are happening. But I think that the embodiment of the chart and experiencing your chart is sort of the route that I take when it comes to being an astrologer. I'm not like a clinical, like professionally estranged. Okay, that's interesting. Professionally.
Sounds good.
The words there. So it's about embodying an experience, which is what we're doing with life. Like if we can't use the astrology in our everyday life and the magic in the mundane, which is, you know, like what I work with everyday enlightenment, magic in the mundane. Like that's my big teaching philosophy, because I've done all of those, you know, retreats and courses and stuff. I did them in my 20s with a child, and you know, it all seems very fancy for these, you know, women who don't have children and they're in Bali and, I'm in Egypt, I'm a temple goddess, blah, 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 blah. I mean, that's not fucking reality, darlings, you know, like that's not reality. And how are you a temple goddess when you're fucking stuck at home and your car breaks down or you've got to put a tent up, you know, like how are you a temple goddess then, right?
I freaking love this.
And there's nappies to deal with.
My goodness.
That's right. There's real life to deal with, you know, like there's grief, there's death, there's homelessness, like there's these things to deal with. Like that is enlightenment, you know, bypassing humanness to be spiritual, easy, fucking easy. We can all do that. That's easy. But actually integrating, embodying and experiencing spirituality, like whatever umbrella that needs to be, which is, you know, it's not a great umbrella, but whatever it needs to be, is done in your home and done in the four walls, done in, you know, in the hospital room when a loved one's dying, done when there's a tragedy, done when you're in the fucking Kali rage and you want to rip your husband's head off. Like that's where it's done. Like that's where the actual work is done, when the kids are sick, when you are doing these things. Everything else is easy, you know, and I know I'm not trying to be trivial or irreverent, but I am reverent and irreverent. I think we get to be both. But the thing is that is where the magic happens. And I think that that's what 2020 did for a lot of people. That's why we've seen so many divorces of 20 plus years marriages, because if you don't know who you are and they don't know who they are and all of the focus has been on the kids, and then 25 years later it's like, oh, who am I, who are you, I'm not happy. That's a marriage that hasn't, you know, it's been maybe disconnected for 10 plus years or whatever that's been. So I think that 2020, I mean, we're always going to talk sort of pre-2020, post-2020 in a way. But 2020 revealed a lot of that for a lot of people. I know countless marriages of 20 plus years that fell. But I mean, I'd looked at them at least 6 years ago and thought, how are they still together? You know, like that marriage had been dead for years and years. So people being forced to be shut down or locked down or whatever it was called, you know, like, you know, for some, I remember my husband looking at me and he, you know, and there was so much going on and he's just like, you know, we're made for these times, babe. Like we'll thrive. And we did. Like 2020 was an amazing year for me and my family, but, you know, yeah, high five to that. Yeah.
Yeah, but what you're also saying is like people have FOMO about being in the enlightenment moments, about being there with a sick child, being with, you know, the Kali moments, or just, you know, doing the dishes and the this and the that when they know this is happening out there. Like the FOMO is just the biggest crack of shit. Because, you know, if you're not finding that magic in the mundane,
yes.
Or what is the mundane, you know, really is the mundane having long lunches, basically. Is the mundane actually, you know, tilling the soil in your back garden, you know, watching something.
Exactly.
I don't know.
That's what I was hearing when you were talking about that. It's talk about the magic and the mundane. I'm also thinking about when we're in that stuff that you've been talking about, those times when you know, there's death or there's grieving, there's the kids, there's all of that stuff. How are we reacting in those moments is what we call the spirituality. That's what the way I see it now is, how am I reacting in this situation right now that's having an effect on me and those around me? Am I the one that needs to move it and shift it? That's the level of spirituality now in the times we're living in. That's the feeling that I get anyway.
Definitely. And I think that there is, you know, I've been talking about this for a little while. I'm a very simple lass. As intense as I am, I'm very, very simple, you know, simple life, simplicity. I'm a Taurus stellium, lots of planets in Taurus, you know, like for me, it's just grounded, rooted, anchored, good sex and good food. If you're well fucked and well fed, you're good, right? Like you are very, very good, let's be honest. And so, yeah, 20 plus years of that.
That's going to be your.
Oh my God, we need you on more. Seriously. I'm laughing because I'm laughing, but I'm also going, wow.
Because it's just that's the simple truth, isn't it? How far have we strayed from that whole sensory enjoyment and
but the story, these deep stories that, we carry around with us that really are not getting us anywhere. They're just anchoring in us to a time that no longer exists. But we still like to tell this fucked up story that actually has no meaning to us any longer. Listening to you talk is like unhooking parts of that story and letting yourself fucking fly for the first time ever. It's like, this is what I'm getting from your story, and I freaking love it. Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. I'm so glad to hear that. Like that's, it's for life is just obviously so sacred, right? Like every day it's fragile, and we miss the point by, again, looping and getting stuck in stuff that's just not for us anymore. And it doesn't deter from trauma. And I think that that's a big part of me maybe not using my story to market myself. I mean, look, I'm saying that with a bit of a silent nod, like this new marketing age, these young women using things. But, not even just that, like I'm like, there is deep reverence for what we've been through, but using it to sell all of your programs, like, and every time I was the, I'm like, fuck, if I had to say all my things every time I wanted to sell something, boring, like, and it's not because the story itself isn't boring. I mean, like, this brings out my heart, and I am so grateful to be sharing this with you both today. Like, this was the best, podcast call I've got, because it wasn't just about, oh, can you tell us the astrology? Like, it's, can you tell us about you? And that's beautiful. Like, because I'm constantly like, I love hearing about people. So you guys, you girls, you Girl Awakening, are right up there, tickety tick tick, because it is important to tell the deep, rich stories. But there is a difference between, like I said, the body knows, and it's like when I talk about my mother or whatever, like it's not a non-attachment in a callous way. It's just that I can see that, like, I've healed from these things, and I can speak about them freely with depth, and this can sometimes be sobbing tears, and then other times it could be rage, or other times there could be, not so much rage anymore, but, other times there could just be lightness around that. But, these staying hooked into things, just looping and looping. I mean, there's no time for that anymore. Like, there's just no time for that. Everything's accelerating now. And if we don't, move with that, but in saying that, this is where I'm talking about that stripping back to simplicity, digesting life, metabolizing life, enjoying these things. And that's something that, someone with the Taurus stellium does, like people often say, like, oh, you got unwell because you need to slow down, you're giving too much. I'm like, darling, don't project that onto me, because that's not my story. I am someone who relishes in laziness. I am not someone of a hustle that constantly outpours. Something that I teach and that I talk about a lot is mine and my husband's marriage has always been first, not the kids, to many women's dismay. And it's only because we're the crowning arc of our family. And so if I am constantly overflowing, which I am, with my heart is constantly overflowing, my children and my husband aren't getting the bottom of the barrel of me. They're not coming home to just me scooping out, oh, I've got a little bit for, and usually the husband's the one who ends up last, perhaps, and whether he deserves that or not, that's, someone else's story. But the thing for me is that I fucking adore and worship my husband. We've been together since we were 19, 20 years old, like over half of our lives, and it gets better and richer and more like the sex. How does that get better? I swear we're both going to die of a heart attack. But the thing is that, this is the thing. It just gets better and richer. But we've done so much work on our marriage and our family that, again, like for me, everyone gets my overpour. And if I'm depleted a little bit, I will fill up, and my filling up is just maybe, I'm a very Taurus, like I said, simple, bit of Netflix, go for a walk, like those sorts of things, good food. But ultimately, this again is that our family is built on this hub of, offering, it's offering. And if me and Joel are good, then our kids are good. And we're, like we like our proudest part of our lives is our family, you know, our 3 girls and what we've created, because it does take work and consistency and commitment, and it takes all of those things. And that's, you know, not what people want anymore. Like, they want the big bells and whistles and, you know, the proposals online and all the weird things that are happening and all those sorts of things. And whilst life is accelerating, there is this deep call to still strip back to simplicity and, you know, to come back to the humble things that make you happy. And I think that that's where we can thrive, and that's where we're not missing the point. Yeah.
So agree.
Yeah.
I so resonate.
Yeah.
So hear you. Yeah. And even with the whole husband thing, exactly the same. It's a beautiful thing if you can just allow it all to, you know, come together and happen like that. It's just so beautiful hearing you say that.
And I'm coming back to what you said before about life is sacred. Like it's like what you were sharing is just that full reverence for your experiences and what is in your heart, and allowing everything to be in context as opposed to being a marketing tool. I mean, that is just one of the saddest things that I find about humanity these days, is that, you know, our lives are not a marketing tool.
Yes.
And
please say that louder. That is so good. The performance, the vulnerability and word of authenticity performance. It's a performance. You know, it's
anymore too. I think there's a new thing happening where that's just not. I think this authenticity is really the way through, and if there's more people that are just deciding that that's, you know, where they're going to stand, I just don't think the other's going to stick for much longer. I think it's all, you know, the veil's very thin. I wanted to ask you, and I know it's a personal thing for everybody, but you know, your healing journey, what does the healing journey look like for you? Like, I know, I mean, we're sharing lots of very personal things, but just for our listeners, you know, everybody's healing's different. What is healing parts of whatever you've been through? I don't want to just pick one thing. What's it like for Tiarnie?
I know, and it's complex, isn't it? Healing, you know, it's a word that's actually sort of, I don't know, even just you asking me the question, it's like, okay, like getting deep with that word is so, because it's again been bastardized, because it's a marketing tool, like, you know, healing, right? But again, you know, and we come back to that word, the work, you know, which again, people are always like, well, what's the work? You know, like, and I get the, you know, just the confusion around, well, what am I actually doing? And this is the thing. So again, we're sort of masking it as something to do, like to produce, like I need to be productive to work and to get the work done. But again, as I always come back to, it's what you're doing daily, you know. And for me, the healing, as opposed, is self-awareness was the biggest key. Like when I, you know, I met Louise Hay not long after I read You Can Heal Your Life, which of course is the Bible. And it's interesting, you know, these days, these younger spiritual people have no idea who any of these real spiritual teachers were, where everything came from. And even then, it doesn't even come from them. It came from way before. I mean, this is eons old. We know that. So we're not talking new age bullshit here. But Louise Hay, Wayne Dyer, you know, king and queen, right? Like they just are. And so I read, you know, You Can Heal Your Life, and a big part of even, you know, the journey, and I still teach this, is self-awareness. And it's something that not many people have. And it doesn't matter if people reckon that they have. I don't know too many people who do. And because self-awareness means that you cannot ever hide from yourself. And that is very difficult and very confronting, because people want to be fed and to believe appeasing lies, because that's easier to handle. Tell me what to do. Tell me who to be. What do you think? Hence, you know, like going outside of yourself, like psychics and things like that. If we just keep placing all of our power outside of ourselves, we then are free of responsibility. So that again veils any sort of healing that we can do on ourselves, because again, we're disempowered on some level, right? So again, we've got to strip back to self-healing and, you know, and self-awareness, and looking and facing your own inner monster. Like I work a lot with Algol and a lot with Medusa, because she also is a part of, you know, astrology, and looking at our own inner monsters. And, you know, it's my middle daughter, who's 18. She's a fiery, she's a force to be reckoned with. Scorpio moon. But you know, she's just like, I don't like nice people. Nice people are fake. You know, no one's ever that nice. And, you know, and she's right. So she's very Lilith, you know, she's embodying Lilith, because Eve is nice and palatable. And Lilith was in the Garden of Eden before. Lilith was there before Eve, right? And so Lilith was banished and she left, and all these things happen. You know, it's a big story of its own. But ultimately, Adam gets lonely, wants Lilith back. She doesn't. So then her children are killed, and then that's when the screeching and the howling, and everyone was scared of Lilith, right? Like, she was bloodthirsty, and that's okay, because that's a part of the female story. There is the bloodthirsty, the rage, right? It's just, when a healed Lilith knows better, she does better, right? So there's the evolved Lilith. But then Eve is made from Adam's body, right? So again, there's this subservient message that has been trickled in with us. Anyway, I'm sort of just, you know, rabbiting on about, you know, that sense of, you know, being empowered. That's all it is, really, is that Lilith decided that if she wasn't a team with Adam, if they couldn't be together, she wasn't going to serve him, or she would rather be alone. And that was her being empowered. And this is where self-awareness and facing our own inner monsters is so important, because if we are like, oh, no, I would never think a bad thought. I'm like, I think you're lying to yourself there. Like, you know, it's the martyr syndrome. I always talk about maiden, mother, martyr. Not just maiden, mother, crone. Crone comes after martyr. And for a lot of women, martyr is a big identity for them. And I'm sure that you can all imagine that I have never been a martyr. That is certainly not something that I would do. So I think that healing comes from a real sense of foundational self-awareness, to face yourself in every moment. You know, when you just act like a fucking asshole, and then you just pretend that it didn't happen. It's like, no, you've got to pull yourself up on that, you know. And these are tiny little things. I'm not talking about massive healing traumas. Some people need therapy. Yeah. That's the reality of it. You are going to have to work through some stuff. But then there has to be a willingness to heal. Not everyone wants to heal because they want to stay stuck. It's easier if I just keep telling this story. Oh, but 10 years ago, this happened to me. Today's a new day, you know. And that seems easier to do for a lot of people. I get that. But, you know, I've had people come to me and like, oh, tell me, you know, what's happening in my chart. And I'm like, you don't need an astrologer. Like, I'm not, you know, I'm not someone who's like, oh, you know, come and see me all the time. Like, you know, if you're seeing anyone too much, again, disempowered, not facing and not doing the work, because it's very easy even to see a therapist. Like, my beautiful therapist just retired, and I'd been seeing her for a long time, off and on, for like 18 years, off and on. She was a beautiful Pisces Reiki lady. Of course, she was spiritual, but she was a psychologist. And so the work that we did was great, because astrology and psychology is great. She helped me to unpack some amazing things about my childhood. But ultimately, you know, she just retired. But the thing is that if you're not doing the work after the session, it doesn't matter. And it's the same with the spiritual, well, what I call human bypassing, not spiritual bypassing. It's like, if you're not doing the work, as in integrating it when you're triggered, when you're challenged, when something comes up in your field, because the universe, I think, is it Pema Chodron? I never know how to say her name right. That's just like, you know, that it will just keep appearing in a different form. Wow. You know, the same thing just keeps appearing for people when they're not healed in different facets. Oh, now it's at the bookshop. Now it's at Woolworths. Now it's on the road when you're driving. Now it's your partner. Now it's your kids. Now it's your neighbor. So it will just keep coming back. And that's going to show you where you haven't healed, or where you haven't done the work to heal and integrate and to let go. Letting go is hard for humans. I get that. We do. We do find it hard to let go because, again, we all have some level of control that we want something to be in on some level, and it just depends the varying degree of that. But I think that healing is a journey, but we're not constantly healing. You know, I see some people, I'm like, oh, you're still dealing with that. Wow, like that's, you know, you're still talking about that. And I'm like, where's the joy if you're constantly healing? You know, we've got to be in joy and not just in process. You know, a lot of people get stuck in the processing. Oh, now like this happened, so I've got to, like, this is a trigger and I've got to do this and I've got to do that. And it's just like, oh, fuck, boring. Like, how boring to constantly be in that. But this is coming from, you know, the integration and embodiment of doing the work and healing. Like, I very, very rarely get triggered anymore. Like, what? By what? like by what?
Laughing at things instead of like getting triggered. Like I think that's a thing that's been coming through for me lately is like sometimes people looking like you're laughing. It's like, well, it's not touching me. It's not like I
Exactly.
anything else but laugh because it seems so silly what's happening right now,
And I think that's when you've done quite a lot of work. It's the not touching you part, right? It doesn't matter how we respond. It's just like something is always going to happen outside of us. There is always things that we could react to, respond to, that could shake us. And if you're that person that constantly gets shaken and stirred by all of the external experiences day in and day out, I mean, apart from being very tired and exhausted and emotionally and spiritually depleted, you're living on everyone else's fumes at the end of the day. It's just like, oh, that person said this and this person did this, and like you're constantly in that sort of mode. And when you are that sovereign, solid, peaceful person, like I will choose, I've got Mars in Taurus, but I will choose my inner peace over anything else. So people think I'm really complacent or I don't like care about the war on children and things like that. I'm just like, you don't see me crying in my own home, but I don't actually need to go and have more white noise and this happening and being loud or aggressive or angry. That's not in my chart to do that. Like some people are front line, like they're rallying. That's awesome. I don't have that in my chart. Like that's not who I am. My internal peace and what I do like what I do, because what we do on the micro, and just like I think Mother Teresa says, you want to like change the world, sweep your floor, make your bed. Like it's what I do on the micro that affects the macro. It's all this work that I have done that and people like, I work with people and it's just like, they're always nearly like, so much has changed in my life, but I really don't know how and what you've done. And I'm like, it's because I'm here. Like, this is what I'm for. So I do a lot of my work in the background. I've got 12th house stuff where all of the magic happens when, yes, I've got a 12-month container. I don't show up every week to blow wind up their ass, to do all these sorts of things that all these, new people want to do. I just hold the space, and that takes, it takes skill, it takes experience, it takes actually doing the work and being able to heal and move through things. And again, being able to not be ruffled by the million things that are going to continue to happen because peace is more important to you. And it's not that you don't care. I think that's a really big thing, is that if a woman's, not like raging out or, like just constantly triggered by all these things, that she doesn't care. It's like, actually, she might actually care more. And her caring is more helpful because it's not from an emotionally reactive space. It's emotionally intelligent. And I think becoming an emotionally intelligent woman, it's very Pallas Athena, is far more wise than the latter.
Yeah. And there's a bushflower essence called Mountain Devil. For a phase for a while years ago, that was something I kept calling as needing, and it's about emotional whirlwind and like the washing machine of emotions. I think sometimes we get like, and like you said, like the poor cousin version of Lilith is we get trapped in that, as opposed to, the full empowerment that you shared around Lilith. And I'm hearing you speak and you're talking around your chart and how you're sharing yourself. And I keep coming back to that Pluto moon and in the first house, which is like, in the higher expression of that is transformation of the peoples, isn't it? Like part of your powerful connection with people, whether you actually then just stand there and don't really say much, people are going to feel you because your intention is there, and
my moon is in Cancer in the 10th house. And so the moon in the 10th, so yes, I've got Pluto in my first and Lilith in my first, but Pluto and moon square.
The Pluto Lilith and the moon square.
Yes.
Purpose in the world.
Exactly. Yeah, it's the matriarch. And that's why I can get like a little bit, I mean, if people listen to my podcast, I get a little bit antsy and high horsey sometimes because I want to protect people, and I can't do that. Like everyone has their own journey, but I'm also like not someone who has ever taken advantage of people or, it's just that moon in Cancer in the 10th is like this this spidey sensey collective antenna. Like any person with moon in the 10th has this. We actually are quite progressive. Like stuff that I was doing, in my 20s, people are now like sort of marketing and they're in their 30s, and I'm like, oh my god, I did that 20 years ago, but it wasn't really in then. And also we didn't have social media. I was becoming an astrologer, not learning memes and AI and all the bullshit that's out there. I had to go to fucking libraries and sit there and fucking read library books every fucking week with my child. We had to walk to the library every other day so I could get all the library books and sit there and not cast charts even on computers and stuff, right? So I think that
the pilgrimage was real.
yes, I mean, and a bit of that's lost, and that's okay, because I love the internet. I love that we get to do something like this, and that we can just pull up a chart on astro.com. Sweet, cool, like this is awesome, like we can see all of those things. But I think that I've just in this vortex.
Yes, just on what we just spoke about too. All of it's just so freaking amazing and relevant.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I'm noticing too is that the more aware we become and the more conscious we become, and we like to call it radical responsibility, where we're constantly aware of how we're feeling, our reactions and whatever else. And if we're not, then the universe is so swiftly and so quickly right now in these moments tapping us in all different ways if we're conscious of it. So that's the thing that I'm noticing in my world. If there's anywhere where I'm like feeling a little bit lazy or not taking that radical responsibility, the universe is like, Joe, tap, here's something coming like a different angle somewhere, and it's like, oh, holy shit, okay, yep, thank you. So,
and that's such a great word too, Joe, like the responsibility piece, because that comes into the true self-awareness is being self-responsible, taking responsibility for your part in what you're playing as well. And I think that the universe, I always say that the universe is a secret, not spy. So the thing is that you can say all you want and you can put on the show and put on the act, but the universe really knows what's going on. Like the universe knows. You can't ever get away from the truth. Like the truth is always there, even if you want to hide it, and even if you want to hide it from yourself. And I think that that's a big part of healing, is awakening to what needs to be healed within you, facing some of those things, facing your toxic parts of that, facing, that you genuinely don't want to let go of something. And if you can just say that out loud, guess what? Something shifts in the universe. If you're, no, I hate the drama in my life. And I'm like, yeah, but your life is 20 years of drama. Like you're lying to yourself, so the more you lie to yourself, the deeper the vortex goes, right? Like it just becomes this deep, muddy chasm that you just can't get out of. So all of a sudden this responsibility, this awareness piece comes in, and remembering that the universe is there. But also I hope that more so with all of this stuff is that, it's hard too. Like I say this stuff like, oh, this is just easy. Of course it's, it's still been work. It's still been trial and error. It's still been doing these things. But the biggest thing is when you are just who you are, like, and it was so funny. Just my husband was talking about something like, I don't know, like corporate world stuff. Like I always am like, oh, like a fly on the wall, like, oh, like muggle life, right? Like, and there's nothing wrong with muggles. So please don't take that personally. Like I love muggles, but muggle lives and, offices and things like that. I'm like, oh, so curious. I feel like on Harry Potter when they're asking Hermione what her dad does, and she's like, my dad is a dentist, la la la, and they're like, oh, that's interesting. I'm like, oh, is that happening at work? Anyway, but the thing with my husband is that he's got an Aries moon, right? So he's very honest at work in a big company, in a big corporation. He just is honest, and it's like, well, that's what like that's the only way to pierce through the stuff, and I think that. And that just goes with everything, like just being who you are is enough. It's enough. It's good enough. You don't have to do 20 years of healing. But if you are willing to face yourself and to be honest with yourself and become responsible, but become aware in the co-creation of reality that you are a part of, and not just everything's just happening to me all the time, life changes, and life is rich, and life is, it's exciting, and it is passionate, and it is joyful, and you're not constantly processing things all the time because you're constantly triggered or upset, or that person this or that person that. Like when we're constantly focused on those things, we're taking away from really the joy and the essence, of us, and us just showing up as ourselves. Yeah.
So beautiful. And just and with you communicating, and I can feel the space expanding too. You know, we create more space when we're living in that place that you just talked about, and which allows more of that to come in, you know, instead of being tied down to and the space being filled with old ways that we're not a part of anymore.
Exactly.
So you were sharing before around a few things just made me sort of think around like the generational thing, like because there's like within astrology there's the fast moving planets and the slower moving planets, and you get generational kind of things and happening, and even the way our parents dealt with trauma as opposed to the way we deal with trauma, the way our children deal with trauma. Otherwise, obviously there's lots of intrinsic factors along the way, but going back to say like people like Wayne Dwyer and Louise Hay and, you know, those people who were big people in the space of bringing so much information to the masses and creating such a awakening with their time of what they were sharing. Like, and you were like in the room, the youngest in the room were there, like, did that kind of, was that like a love language for you, like just to kind of be in spaces with people like that and just going, I'm home?
Definitely. I remember like meeting them both, obviously, and getting them to sign my books. And, you know, Erroneous Zones is just such a pulling your own strings and Erroneous Zones. If you haven't read those, they're very old, but they're fundamental books around everything that we've been talking about, actual spiritual awakening, realistically, and self-responsibility. But when I met Louise, I said, you know, I want to do this. This is what I want to do. You know, I knew astrology was my whole life, but also there was this like motivational speaking piece. But I mean, you know, like I'm a speaker, like Tiarnie Talks. I've got Mercury and Gemini. Like all I do is talk. But I met her and she whispered in my ear and she goes, you will. And then Wayne Dyer, he's the 10th of May and I'm the 9th of May. And, you know, he's like, oh, we'd share the same time zone. And you know what? They died the exact same day, like 6 years apart or 4 years apart. Like it's wild that they both died the exact same date, just years apart. Like I can't remember if it was 2 or 3. I've still got the photos. I still always share them in memory. I was just a young little 20-year-old, you know, hugging them. I've read their books, you know, reading sort of texts like this in my 20s. And it was home for me because it just felt like who I was, you know, and it was home. And I remember my parents sometimes like, oh, you know, because, you know, I got to go and see them for like $130, right? Like it was fucking, but I was just, you know, I'm a single mom and, you know, I'm not making all the big bucks back then. And they would always like, you know, say things like, oh, I can't believe you've wasted your money on that. You know, I'm like, yeah, you're smoking cigarettes. Like, I'm sorry, like I'm going to better. So it always definitely was my home, you know, like those spaces were always my home. I would spend days and hours just at a friend's place who was studying astrology, and we'd just sit there and she'd teach me about my chart and she'd do that. That's what I was doing in my, you know, early 20s when my daughter was young. And so, it's just, those places are, you know, fundamentally home for me. And in my 20s, it was just, you know, it was my whole life. You know, I started teaching meditation classes, in my mid-20s, and it was always quite difficult because all of the women would come in and they were older than me and they were, oh, where's the teacher? I was like, oh, me. And then, you know, that would rub some of them up the wrong way, others not so much. But, you know, it's been such a beautiful journey to get here. And I remember when I finally like wrote my book, wanted to write it in my 20s, but of course, you know, you needed more experience. And you know, and I often laugh that, you know, I don't take anyone seriously until they've had their Saturn return. And, you know, and I'm like, but I was that person too, you know, like I was younger than 28. And, you know, yes, I had different life experiences. You know, by 28, I've had an 11-year-old child, 12-year-old child. So it was very different. And I was, I think, you know, still in a different space than most, you know, people could be at that age with no children. But, you know, but now it's just, you know, sometimes I meet these young astrologers and I'm like, I love you, but, you know, just wait. Like it gets better. You think that you know it all now, my friend. Like, you just wait.
On that note too, I want to, because we are coming, like we're
an
hour, and I really want to ask you, you know, from an astrology point of view, we definitely need to get you back on because I reckon for your awakening story, whatever it is, I don't care. I just want to
spend more time.
But
anytime.
Ask you about your astrology version of what you feel is happening right now on the planet, because there's we all know there's a lot of stuff going down. If you can give us a 5 or 10 minute rundown.
Yeah, as quick as I can, speedy sticks. Yeah. Well, ultimately, of course, like 2020 was a big thing. Astrologically, we had a big meetup of planets that hadn't met up for 500 years. And so that was, you know, the beginning. And I think even in 2019, when I was sharing that something is going to happen and affect the entire world, I didn't experience the enormity. And I don't ever consider myself psychic. Being an astrologer isn't like a party trick. Like, oh, tell me about this. It's like, no, like this is just, to me, it's not just it's magic, it's cosmic magic, but there's, you know, there's timing and there's tools and there's cycles that we're looking at, right? So you know, it's you're not a hero if you predict something in astrology. Like, you know, some of these like younger ladies are like, I said that this is going to happen with Pluto and Aquarius. I'm like, I'm pretty sure we've been saying that for 10 years. Like, you're not a hero, right? Like, this is just what's going to happen, right? But the thing is that saying that was actually quite big to say in 2019, like something will affect every person. I was like, I come home to my husband because I'm so practical and pragmatic and, you know, not like, oh, la, 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 like a floaty, airy, fairy person. And I was just like, oh, I feel so weird saying that. And then it all happened. But it really was just the astrology of what you know, I've been calling since then is this Renaissance, which is what happened 500 years ago, is that Renaissance period from the Dark Ages. That's sort of what's happening now. So there is a collective awakening going on, but I think that 2020 showed people like, what is love? What are your priorities? Simplicity. I mean, the nodes themselves were in the signs of Cancer and Capricorn, and the North Node was in Cancer, saying stay home, be with your family, be a parent, be a mother, and the South Node was in Capricorn, going patriarchy, money, business, success, let it die. So I was like, and then the nodes shifted. The North Node was in Gemini, and Gemini is around our everyday environment, our neighbors, and just what we're doing in our community. Whereas Sagittarius, which is the South Node, so the South Node is like what we're moving away from. So that South Node in Capricorn first, when we sort of had the 2020 thing, is like, you know, money doesn't matter, right? Like going to work and maybe not being with your children or family or at home doesn't matter, because all of a sudden people were forced to work from home, right? Then the South Node moved into Sagittarius, North Node into Gemini. All of a sudden it was like, stay local, don't travel overseas, and we were locked down anyway. So I mean, the literalness of astrology sometimes, I mean, still blows my head off every single day. Like, I'm like, oh my God, you can't make that up. What's coming on? You know, I still act like a fucking psycho every time I see something really cool happen. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't even think about that. Like, it was just so amazing, like constantly. So it's really set us up dharmically and karmically for these times, right? Like, we're being set up to change, you know, and my biggest thing is I say to people all the time, it's like, I'll look at people's transits or something and I'm like, hey, change or be changed. It's up to you. You know, and if you are actively participating in your life and self-aware and self-responsible, these sorts of changes don't ruffle you as much. You know, they're not like, oh my God, like, you know, oh, I can't believe, because 2025 is much bigger than 2020. Like, the astrology that we're having in 2025 is fucking wild. Plus, we're in a collective 9 in 2025. So it is the end of the end of the end. I mean, Jim Morrison is just in my head constantly. Like, the whole Doors album is just going to be like the Renaissance of the Doors, surely. But this is the end, you know, like, and it's the end of a 9-year cycle. It's the end of some big planetary stuff, because Pisces, which is the final sign of the zodiac, it's the end, it's the death canal, it's the birth canal, it's the womb, right? We've got Neptune there. So Neptune's been there for 15 years. Neptune dips into Aries for the first time in our lives, 165 years. So this is the beginning. Aries, the 0 point of Aries, the beginning, the equinox, the start of the tropical zodiac, the beginning of astrology, right? 0 Aries, the baby, the first breath that we take. And the final degrees of Pisces, the birth canal, right? So we are having Neptune in and out, late Pisces to early Aries. We are having Saturn for the first time in 30 years, in and out. And just to sort of spice that shit up more, Venus and Mercury are both retrograde over that little section as well. Pisces, Aries, back to Pisces, back to Aries. Like, this is wild, like monumental, haven't seen this sort of shit before. So that's happening. This is all happening like in the first part of the year. So again, it's endings, and what I've talked about, of course, because I, you know, shameless promotion. I write a kit every single year, and it's a 200-page book of telling you all the things that are happening. But, you know, I've said in the kit many times, and I'll absolutely post you both one for free, and gift you both one for for allowing me to come on here. But in the kit too, I've written several times, and what I'm saying a lot is it's a very liminal, numinous, in-between year next year, because we're having such big planetary ingresses into new signs that, like Neptune, we've never seen in Aries in our lives. Saturn, it's been 30 years, so we can all track back to 30 years ago what was going on for us because of those same cycles, but they're both moving into the beginning of the zodiac, right? And then, of course, that Mercury, bloody Venus, friggin' retrograde, both at the same time, both nearly hitting the exact same degrees. Honestly, this is crazy. Then, just to add a couple of extra things before we wrap up, is that Uranus, who is the planet of awakening and disruption and chaos, you know, he is Uranus, sky god. You know, he had babies with Gaia, right? Like that is Uranus in mythology. He is moving into Gemini for the first time in 84 years. So he's also moving through that cusp of that late Taurus to early Gemini. So what you're seeing here is planets moving from yin, water, earth, feminine, receptive and soft, as much as people might not think it's been receptive and soft. Of course, Pluto has also moved into Aquarius from Capricorn for the first time in our lives as well, after 248 years. So the thing is that now we're shifting this whole collective timeline. Like it's literally like you can feel it, right? Like it's a timeline shift, but next year it's still going to feel like tectonic. We're still going to be, you know, people's DNAs are changing. Like we are doing incredible things. Like this is cool shit. Like, and if you are a bit of a quantum nerd like me and can time travel and all that shit, like this shit's just really wild. But we're moving from that yin, receptive, gentle earth and water signs to fire and air. Like this is the beginning of the end. And I mean, that is what 2025 holds. It is great change, much more wild, I think, than 2020. You know, just different, you know, because that big conjunction happened, but we're seeing like several planets just doing something and quite big things, endings, beginnings. So you might not, you know, might not be here anymore, but you're also not there. And we're going to be, you know, in between worlds. And then the collective 9, we're in the year of the snake. I mean, fucking hell, like it's just transformation plus.
Yeah. I'm excited. So
excited. It is exciting.
And I think like we've talked about, and we keep going back to the authenticity and the simplicity. I think the more that if we can sit in that, that's how we're going to prepare ourselves for what's coming.
Yeah.
Just like really just being okay with what's happening, keeping everything very simple and basic, and just being truly authentic and sitting who we really are.
Yeah. Strip it all the way back. It's like a big defrag, you know. I think that over the coming 18 months, it's going to be pretty big. And it's sort of just like, you know, not just restarting a computer, but completely re-leveling, up-booting. Like it is very exciting, but it's going to be very tumultuous for, I think, the collective. Again, depending on where you're at, like emotionally and spiritually and on your journey. You know, a lot of people are still in shock and disarray and, oh my God, when is this going to calm down? And I'm sort of like, it's not. Like the cosmic energies, this is it now. Like 2025 is the halfway show of the 2020s, and the whole 2020s is like being squeezed through the cosmic eye of the needle. And 2025, which just happens to be the 9, which is the end, which is smack bang in the middle of the 2020s, is really the sort of the big bells and whistles. 2026 will still be different, but all of those planets actually slip into those new signs, and we're beginning thing. But 2025, it's like, you know, if you're not anchored and grounded, you're surely, you know, like there'll be a lot of people leaving the planet, and as we've already seen the last 4 years, and that continues because it is very hard to be in a world like this if, you know, things are really hard inside of your own world, and it's so sad, and it's very tricky for a lot of people out there. And I do give a lot of honor to those people, because they're, you know, especially if they have no awareness of these things too, it's just like this sort of inner turmoil that they're sort of navigating. And awareness for me is always like the biggest, it's a superpower. To understand what's going on and to work with these cosmic cycles gives us power. Like, it empowers us to know, like, instead of going, oh, this is happening. Like, I look at my chart and I'm like, oh, of course that's happening. Pluto's opposite my moon, motherfucker. Like, and just, again, it is what it is, like it's this is the transit I'm going through. We all go through big rites of passage and initiations at certain points in our lives. But collectively, it's a big eye of the needle thing. We're just really being squeezed through in the 2020s. But 2025 is like it's a bit of a grand finale.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think it's
it's required.
Shows that we're here to have the contrast and to experience.
Exactly.
I'm up for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I feel like what you've shared today, like the things that stand out is about the whole giving permission to be here and to embrace all that it is, and to not be in the loop, but to allow what makes you happy, to create that space within you, so that, because there's the talk around when people pass to the other side and they have like the near-death experiences and things, where the light is so bright that they can't, it's like they feel like they need sunglasses. They can't hold the energy. So they, part of their coming back is because, like, another version of what we talked around the default, where we sit in the negative loop as opposed to the joyful loop. It's like what you're talking about. What I hear is like the light is so bright. If we allow the freedom in ourselves to be in our hearts and in our joy, we have that opportunity, and let go of the dark ages. We have that capacity then to kind of start embracing what's coming through, with, as you say, as we're coming through that birth canal into the light.
Exactly.
Very, very cool shit.
It is. It's so rad.
You've just really heated us up so much. Like, we're just like, the energy here is just wild. Thank you.
Love this podcast. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. I know our listeners are going to want to jump on board to your website, so I will pop that at the bottom of the notes.
Yes.
Thank you so much, honey. It was literally our honour to sit with you today and see your journey.
Oh, thank you. It was my honour as well. It was so humbling to be able to sit here and share with you both. So I appreciate it so much. Thank you for allowing the space to have me here, and thank you to all of your beautiful listeners for listening to me.
Bye.
So much love.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to our Girl Awakening podcast. We are also on YouTube as Girl Awakening. We'd love to see you there with comments on how our guests resonated with you or your own awakening. Please share the love with a like and subscribe while you're there. A blissful thank you to Ksenia Luki, the amazing artist behind our theme song. We will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.